Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rewilding Wellness Wednesdays. I'm Dr. Christy Vanacore. This is a podcast, yes, but more than that, a community, a gathering place, and a movement. Here, we come together each week to remember what it really means to be well in body, mind, and spirit and soul. This is a space to listen, to learn, to ask questions, to find your voice, a place where ancient wisdom and modern science meet, and where we stop trying to fix ourselves and begin to remember who we are. Each week, we gather here not just for information, but for inspiration and transformation, for connection, for the medicine of story and movement and silence and song and community. Rewilding wellness is not something that we do alone. It's something we must do together. And in doing so, we become part of something bigger than ourselves. We become part of the movement back to wholeness. I am Dr. Christy Vanacore, medicine woman, author, lyricist, ceremonialist, trailblazer, offering a different but essential approach known as Rewilding Wellness for adults, children, teens, and families, utilizing multidimensional and bioquantum practices for holistic healing and thriving. This became my mission after witnessing the staggering rates of chronic illness in adults and children and the ineffective and disempowering practices of modern traditional medical care. So I recognized that it was my life's mission to bring the health and wellness industries back to its roots and to reconnect people with their innate self-healing capacities. For almost 3 decades, my work integrates mind, body, spirit, and honors that foundationally we are vibrational beings and that healing can only be birthed in the union of science and soul. As we heal together through frequency, embodiment, cellular recalibration, regeneration, I guide individuals and families to rediscover their body's brilliance and timeless wisdom so that we can all realign with the natural synergy of all of creation. I am here to light the way as you remember your roots, rekindle your instincts, and reclaim your sovereignty. I am here to help you courageously navigate life with grace, ease, peace, and harmony so that you can soar steady and strong, open, awake and aware, and resilient and ready. So that's how I am. Who I am, how I am is great. I'm so excited to be here. I really look forward to this week after week, you guys. And just want to take a moment on that note since I am feeling just exceptionally grateful today. The weather here in Southern Connecticut, New York State here, it's just absolutely gorgeous. It's a very early fall day. It's breathtakingly beautiful. I spent the morning on a beautiful hike and yeah, I'm just tapped in and feeling exceptionally grateful, and just want to take a moment to say that, a little backstory on why I created this. My intention is not just to have another podcast. There's a million and one of them out there, and some of them are truly exceptional and wonderful, and I'm grateful that this platform exists. But I wanted to create, first and foremost, a way for people, no matter what their financial situation, no matter where they were located, I wanted an opportunity for people to access all of this wisdom. And second of all, I wanted to create a community where we could all gather together live and have conversation, similar to how our ancestors did it, where we gathered around a sacred fire and we shared storytelling. I'm a sacred storyteller. Storytelling is part of my medicine. It's part of all of our medicine. And so I'm here, this is on audio, and the last couple of these podcasts have been on audio, and my goal is to get back to doing them on video and having people register for them for free, but just so that we could all gather together and be engaged in conversation. So that's my goal, is to really bring back the communal aspect of healing. It's really missing, and I believe it's one of the reasons why collectively we are suffering so badly. We are not meant to do this alone. So If you've been here with me before, welcome back to Rewilding Wellness. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm thrilled to be connected with you. You'll hear me say this throughout this talk and as well at the end, that if you have questions, reach out to me. If you've got feedback, reach out to me. If you just want to connect with me, reach out to me. I'm not some, ambiguous person hiding behind a screen. I'm a real person. So I love to connect. So please reach out to me. And today's conversation, I mean, like every other one each week, some conversations feel heavier than others, but this conversation does carry a lot of tenderness, as we're going to talk today about addiction. And I want to pause here, even just that word. I want to just pause here with that word for a moment, because I want to honor the fact that that word carries a tremendous amount of stigma. That when people hear that word, they often see it as a sign of brokenness or badness. But I'm here to talk to you today about a few aspects of addiction, but mainly the most important point, if you get nothing else out of this today, is that addiction is not a moral failure. It is a human response to pain, to unmet needs, and to a nervous system that has been carrying far more than it was ever designed to hold. So I understand that for some of you listening, that word addiction brings up shame, perhaps memories of struggle. Maybe it brings up the faces of loved ones. And I want you to know that you are safe here. So my intention, as always, with whatever topic I am covering, is to bring understanding and compassion and to unshame these conversations and to give you insight into what's really going on in the brain and in the body and the spirit. So debunking the myths that keep us in the guilt and shame cycle that only make us sicker. So in today's podcast, I'll be talking about the biology, the psychology, and the bioenergetics of addiction. I'll also highlight the lesser talked about addictions that sort of sneak under the radar, and yet they are really happening, all around us. I'll also share 4 of the deeper patterns in our egos and our defended mechanisms that drive so many of the struggles with addiction that we see on the surface. And my prayer is that you'll walk away from today not only feeling informed, but also reminded that healing is possible and that we can hold one another with gentleness on this journey. We cannot meet force with force. So before I dive in, I also just want to make the point that when I share about a particular topic, so let's take addiction, for instance. Addiction is a massive topic, right? There's so much, even just the couple of outlined talking points that I just mentioned. I mean, I have taught 6-month and 12-month courses on this. I've done full week retreat immersions on this. So there's no way I could possibly cover all of it, right, in one 30 to 60 minute recording. So please know that if there's an aspect of this topic, or each week that you listen, any topic that I cover, if there's an aspect that's missing, please don't think for 1 minute that that means that I don't find it important or that I ignore it in my work with people. No, it just means that maybe that particular thread of the topic is not what I'm choosing to focus on today. Okay, so please know that that's what I mean. Again, this is a big topic, and I'm choosing to highlight certain aspects of it. I like to highlight the things that nobody's talking about. And I also like to debunk myths. So that's what I'm here to do. So let's dive in. So I want to start to talk about addiction through 3 lenses. We're going to talk about it through the energetic lens, the psychological lens and the biological lens. Okay. Remember that as humans, we are multidimensional beings, right? We are energetic, physiological, psychological, relational, and spiritual beings. Okay. It's nothing is ever unidimensional. And addiction is no different. So I'm going to start, even though our energetics is the foundation of who we are. And if you listen to me, you know that I say that ad nauseum, right? We are energy beings. I'm going to start with the biology because, many people that I've worked with through the years who are battling addiction, and I've worked with people, just to put into context, in case, you're listening and you're new to me. I have worked in psychiatric hospitals, medical hospitals. I've worked inpatient, outpatient, community mental health centers, residential treatment facilities. You name it, I've worked there. So I have seen addiction and the many hats that it wears and the many forms and shapes that it takes. And I've sat across from many people, and I've struggled with my own addictions, which I'll be sharing a bit about in this episode. But I understand that so many times I've heard this story that the brain is betraying us. That it's the pleasure sensors in the brain that are betraying me, and that's why I have this addiction. And it's not entirely true. So I want to start by talking about the biological story, because it is going to be really powerful for you to know that the brain is not betraying you. It's making an attempt to adapt to stress. It's actually trying to help you. Okay. So when a child or adult lives with stress or trauma, anything from neglect to abuse to poverty to even just, growing up and living in a relentless hustle culture, the brain's reward system turns on high alert. And when that happens, the stress hormones start to flood the system. And over time, it becomes completely inundated. And so the dopamine receptors, these tiny switches that register pleasure and motivation in the brain, actually decrease in number. It's like a flooded out road. And so that means that the brain doesn't feel pleasure in the way that it used to, right? So quite literally and naturally, we go searching for something, anything that is going to give us a hit and that rush of dopamine, a spark, a sense of life, whether that's alcohol, sugar, scrolling on Instagram. Yes, that's an addiction. Pornography, gambling, opioids, even drama and highly dramatic relationships, highly conflictual relationships. Okay, all of these things give us a rush of dopamine. But here's the thing, the brain, which is trying to protect itself and protect you, begins to downregulate even further. And so it now needs more of that substance or behavior just to feel a little something. And this is what we call tolerance, right? This is when it takes more and more of the substance or thing or behavior to produce the same response. It started out as 2 beers, now has to become 6 beers, has to become 12 beers, right? Because the brain is downregulating. So it takes more to feel more. Meanwhile, those same changes in the dopamine pathways also interfere with the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain sort of right behind your forehead that is responsible for, many of you may have heard the expression, executive functions, things like planning, self-awareness, impulse control, long-term decision-making. Okay, so now when this happens, when the dopamine pathways interrupt and interfere the prefrontal cortex, now the very organ, our brain, that we count on to help us stop. It's like, come on, brain, engage. Help me think of the right thing to do. Now it's compromised. Okay, so this is why white knuckling fails us. It's not about willpower. It's about a hijacked brain. Okay, so understanding this is the first step to dropping the shame that we carry. Okay. So that's a little bit of the biological story. Let's shift now and talk about the psychological story. Okay, so most people with histories of addiction carry deep unmet attachment needs. Okay, but by the way, I realized I just really breezed through that biological. I mean, again, I studied this in school for 7 years. I teach this for multiple months and years. So please know I'm just giving you bullet points. Okay, I know that it's, even more complex, but I'm boiling it down to exactly what you need to know in order to understand you or a loved one, and also to lose the shame. Okay, so back to the psychological story. Sorry, I just felt like I had to say that. So many people with addiction histories, right? We carry these unmet attachment needs. So we've got this innate longing to be seen, to be soothed, to be safe, to feel secure. So when those needs are not met early in life, or when later trauma begins to overwhelm our sense of safety, we turn to substitutes, right? And these substitutes, whether it's a drink or a pill, the attention of a stranger online, or the buzz of a shopping spree, right? Or the thrill, of sex, this becomes what we reach for when we're lonely and bored and ashamed and overwhelmed. Okay, so this lets us be seen. This lets us feel soothed. This lets us feel secure. And this just leads to a cycle, right? So we reach for the thing, whatever the substitute is. And that brings a sense of temporary relief. And then the shame creeps in. And that shame triggers even more craving for relief. Okay, so this is a vicious cycle. And this loop wires itself very deep within our systems, energetically, biologically, psychologically. Okay, so these unmet attachment needs are really at the root of these searches for substitutes, these addictive behaviors. And now I want to say a word or two about the energetic story. Okay, so there's sort of the energetic. So again, each and every one of us at our core, right? We are love. You hear me say that. We are love. We know who we are. And when trauma severs the connection with who we are, we're desperately longing to feel alive and connected and at home in our own skin, right? So trauma is what leaves us feeling numb and disembodied and cut off from our inner spark. Because remember, trauma isn't the experience that happened to us. It's what happens inside of us as a result of that experience, right? So trauma separates us from our inner spark. And so when our life force energy, it's like that inner spark is our pilot light. And when our life force energy is depleted and our energy centers are blocked, we instinctively are looking for a charge, right? We want an electrical charge. And if we can't source it from within, we search for something from without. And so when we say we need to fill the void or fill the emptiness on a bioenergetic level, we're looking to reconnect the circuitry, right? We're trying to restore the flow of energy. And this is why so many ancient healing traditions emphasize in healing addiction that we're restoring the flow of energy, right? So through my work, it's breath, it's movement, it's music, it's prayer, it's connection with the natural living world, it's ritual, it's conscious consumption, beautiful foods, all of the ways that our ancestors knew connected us with the natural flow of energy. Without that reconnection, we are vulnerable to substitutes because we desperately need a charge to feel alive. Okay. So taking those lenses, the biological, the psychological, the energetic, now imagine this. Let's take a brain that's already shaped by trauma and the chronic stress that comes from living in today's world. Okay. And now we are surrounded by a world that is full of ultra processed foods that are intentionally, please notice my words here, intentionally manufactured to spike dopamine. Okay. So we're around this ultra processed, intentionally addictive foods. We have endless access to alcohol and prescription drugs. Okay, we have phones in our pockets that with one click of a button can stream gambling apps and pornography. We are exposed to constant news that keeps our threat responses activated. Now, add to that the weight of economic pressure, right? Fast-paced schedules, isolation, lack of connection to family and ancestors and elders, lack of time in the natural living world, and a culture that punishes instead of helps those who struggle. Okay, I call this, what I just outlined here, I call this the perfect storm. So if I were to write it out formulaically, it's history of trauma, plus chronic societal stress, plus abundant availability of dopamine heighteners, plus self and societal condemnation. This is the formula that has contributed to the epidemic levels of addiction that we see today. And it is so crucial to understand this. It is so critical that we understand that most people are not choosing to harm themselves. They're actually choosing to find relief. And this is the only way they know how to do it. So I want to spend a moment now talking about the lesser sort of popularized, if you will, addictions. Okay, so, when we hear the word addiction, we tend to think of alcohol, heroin, cocaine, hard drugs, right? Maybe even cigarettes. We sometimes, think of it really being what we consume in that way. But so many of the addictions that are quietly and sometimes loudly harming our well-being, they're hiding in plain sight. Okay, sugar and ultra-processed food. This is the most accessible dopamine hit. We are surrounded and bombarded by sugar and processed foods that, again, I know I said this a few moments ago, it bears repeating. They are intentionally created to give us the dopamine hit, so we will go back for more. So we will be anesthetized from ourself and our truth. Okay? So sugar and ultra processed food, the most accessible dopamine hit that's available. Another addiction is work, productivity, and busyness. Okay? Look, our culture rewards this, you guys. Right? Our culture rewards those who can hustle. And yet it's burning us out. Okay. Another addiction is social media and the endless loop of comparison. So the endless scrolling, always seeking and seeing likes, right? Posting content to get likes, liking things that you see, comparing ourselves to other people. We can't get enough of the scrolling. Similarly, gaming, okay? Gaming and gambling. Okay, gaming and gambling. We see it with children. I can't tell you, I must get at least 5 calls a week, literally, from parents asking me to help their children with their video game addiction. It is a real thing. These are intentionally designed graphic lures, if you will, that lure in a child and adult. By the way, I've got several clients, grown men, fathers. One is a grandfather who has they self-profess themselves as a gaming addict. Okay, so these games are intentionally created to lure you in with really attractive graphics, something that's fast paced, the music, all of it is so carefully designed. Gambling is no different. I don't need to tell you what happens when you walk into a casino. Everything from the look of the place to the air that they filter in to the lack of windows, so you can't see what time of day or night it is, right? All of it is set up to keep you getting those dopamine hits. Pornography. Okay, pornography years ago used to be something that, you had to try to get access to, right? I can remember people saying, they tried to steal their dad's Playboy magazine, right? Or years ago, you'd try to scramble the cable box to just catch a glimpse of something. But now pornography is accessible 24/7, right? From anywhere. And all you have to do is click the button that says, I forget, I don't know what the age thing is, 13 or 18, forget what it is now, click this button and you could get in. And when you get in, you're getting access to everything. Okay. And there is an abundance of research that shows that addiction to pornography, and I'll even go down a step to say, never mind addiction, but incessant watching and use of pornography deeply reshapes the brain and really fragments relationships, the one with yourself and the one with others. Shopping and spending. Okay, when we're chasing the new thing high, I call it the new thing. This is something that I've struggled with. I'm going to share more about my personal story in a moment, but I just want a new thing. It feels so good to get a shiny new thing, right? Get you that instant dopamine high. Okay. And then there's other things that people would consider really healthy, like exercise or eating healthfully or bio tracking, right? Using your Aura ring or your Apple Watch. These things can become compulsive. And they're also very punishing. And they're driven by the same survival circuitry. Okay, so what we call addiction isn't only the things that we sort of grow up calling quote unquote bad. It's anything that we become compulsive around that gives us that dopamine hit that we so desperately need. Okay, they all operate on those dopamine pathways. Again, not a moral failing. We're talking about nervous system strategies. Okay, so I want us to take a moment here to just share. I'm very open with my story. I have struggled with several addictions through my life, the most powerful and potent one being that of sugar. And, when I've said that to people, what I almost always get is sort of a chuckle and like, yeah, everyone's addicted to sugar. It's no big deal. Right? I've had professionals say that to me as well, really minimizing or diminishing. Okay. So yeah, maybe I wasn't, hiding bottles, although I did go through a phase of that at one time in my early life, hiding wine bottles. But, just because I wasn't, down deep in the bottle or gambling late at night or, engaging in risky sex or spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in a store, sugar was a profound, quiet addiction for me. So yeah, I was in the pantry searching for chocolate chips. I wrote this story in my first book when, I would go to the Dunkin' Donuts and buy a dozen full-size donuts and go sit in the back behind the building next to the dumpsters, using the dumpsters to hide my car so nobody would see that I was parked there. And I would binge on all of the donuts. And that was when even my eating behaviors were quite disordered. So I would binge and then I would purge, or sometimes not purge, but the guilt that would consume me was incredible. It was exhausting. It was overwhelming. So I get that sweet hit. And for a second, it soothed the exhaustion and the overwhelm. It soothed my need to be seen and heard. It soothed the fact that I didn't feel safe and secure. Right? And biologically, it makes sense. Sugar activates those dopamine pathways the same way that alcohol and cocaine do. if not more. But emotionally, it was the way I was just trying to fill the ache of stress and depletion and unhealthy attachment patterns. And there were so many days when I promised myself, tomorrow will be better. And by the afternoon, I'd be back in the cycle and the shame would pile on. And I share this part of my story because, again, addiction doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's as ordinary as what's on your kitchen counter. So just know, if you recognize yourself in my story, you're not alone and you're not weak. You're human and you're doing the best you can to soothe these unmet needs. I want to talk now for a few moments about there's these four universal undercurrents, as I call them, these underlying patterns that drive human behavior. Okay, I've been studying human behavior for almost 30 years now. And so I've seen these patterns play out, and also in myself. Okay, and naming them can really just be eye-opening, right? When we understand the things that energize our action, that's the first step in making the changes that we so desperately want to make in our lives. And again, we have to do so from a place of love. And that's why shame can't have a part in the story, right? So the things that we call these sort of individual addictions, right? We talked about drugs, alcohol, sex, sugar. Okay, these are symptoms of these deeper patterns. And I want to go through each one of these now because, again, I think it's really eye-opening. And these are universal, friends, okay? So there isn't a single one of us out there that would hear this list and be like, oh, I never felt that. Would simply be untrue. But there are some of us who have it to a greater extent. And that the unmet needs of these things are what help to fuel our reaching for those substitutes. Right? And notice again, I'm using the word substitute for substance. Okay, no shame here. So the first pattern that I want to talk about is an addiction to perfection. Okay, addiction to perfection. So, what I want to, so much I could say here, so much I want to say here. So perfectionism is about not tolerating mistakes, right? And when I was studying shamanism with my shamanic elders, they talk so much about the differentiation between perfection and excellence, right? Because many people, when I say, well, perfectionism, is a disease in and of itself, people will say, but yeah, I'm just striving for excellence. But there's a major difference, right? So whereas perfection does not tolerate mistakes, there's no room for error. Excellence actually incorporates and learns from mistakes. Okay? So when we're talking about this unhealthy pattern that feeds addiction, people who are obsessed with perfection have no tolerance for mistakes or any kind of exposure of vulnerability of any kind. They equate vulnerability with weakness. They don't see it as the sign of strength that it is. Right. And, just going back to kind of the indigenous and the ancient ones, they saw an expression of vulnerability as the highest strength. Right. Because they knew that being vulnerable is when you're really standing in your authentic self. Right. So on the contrary, when we are addicted to patterns of perfectionism, it's almost like we become so numb and anesthetized that we almost become these sort of robots going through the motions. And we deny our humanness and we invest all of our energy and efforts into maintaining some sort of cultivated image or a facade and a mask rather than be exposed for who we really are. Right? So that's this addiction to perfection, one of these undercurrents underneath all the addictions. Second one I want to talk about is the addiction to intensity. Okay, and this is a big one, and this is one that has really been very palpable in my own life. Okay, so those people who carry this pattern have a very low tolerance for boredom. Okay, so if things get too routine or too dull, they've got to exaggerate life. They've got to sensationalize life. They've got to dramatize it. They've got to romanticize it just to feel alive. Okay, so many of these people then, they move to drugs and sex and alcohol to intensify experiences, right? So these are the people, we see this a lot with artists, okay? And, I'm in this category too. Remember, there's no shame here. We're all walking this walk together. Okay. But we see this a lot with artists who say, wow, and just look back to musicians of past and present, wow, when I take X substitute or Y substitute, I can have these incredible experiences, right? And I get even more creative and the colors intensify, right? What that really is about, it's an illusion. It's an illusion that there's more vitality and aliveness there. Right? The ancient ones say that this intensity is actually the shadow side of love. Okay? It actually hurts the heart. So it's really a powerful pattern to have that addiction to intensity. Many of us grew up in chaos and crisis, and so calm can feel very foreign. One of the lines in my first book that so many people, when they email me their experiences with the book, or when I am out in the world, either on retreat, facilitating retreats or other healing experiences, and people will say, one of the most profound lines from your book, it's so simple, is that when you grow up in chaos, stillness is a terrifying place to be, right? And this is true. So when you grow up in crisis and chaos, calm feels foreign. It feels boring. So we've got to chase the drama, the surge, the binges, the high-risk choices, the adrenaline, because that spike of intensity reminds us that we're alive. The next pattern I want to talk about here is this addiction to a need to know, to certainty. Now, this is something, again, that plagues all of us as humans. We want to know, right? We've got this compulsion to control every outcome, right? We Google our symptoms at 2 a.m. We need it, needing all the answers before we can rest, right? We need to know what's coming every moment of the day because we've got this fear of the unknown, right? So this is really driven, and this is this compulsive sense to always be knowing. So people with this pattern do not like surprises. They do not like unexpected events. They tend to have a lot of trust issues. Everything needs to be controlled and manipulated, compartmentalized, strategized. Everything needs to be so thought out. Everything needs to be calculated so that it's all predictable. And so when this pattern is at the helm, we can get very dogmatic and critical and even arrogant, right? So we lose discernment and clarity and objectivity, and we become fixated on things being a certain way. And relatedly, the final pattern I want to talk about here is an addiction to the things that are wrong. I'm trying to phrase how to say this, right? It's this obsession with what's wrong instead of what's right. Okay, so, our brains are wired for survival, right? And so they're built to scan for threats. But so many of us get stuck here, right? The doom scrolling, the rehearsing worst case scenarios, the endless criticisms of ourselves and others, right? When we look at things from a very fixed perspective, we tend to magnify the negative. Our brain is already primed to be negative for survival. So when we've got this pattern, very well developed, we magnify even more the negative experiences. We totally blow them out of proportion. So much so that they completely obscure anything else. And what that creates is a lot of blind spots. And with all of those blind spots there, we can't trust our intuition, right? We lose connection with insight and vision and perception, right? We can't see the blessings and the gifts and the resources that are there right for us. We don't see possibility. We only see problem. So these four patterns, this perfectionism, intensity seeking, the desire and the need to know with certainty, and the fixation on what's wrong, these are not character defects, okay? They're really just attempts to regulate an overwhelmed nervous system. But the tragedy of it is that they keep us stuck in the cycle of trauma and stress. They don't help us to forge the way forward. And they are really what lead us to use all of those substitutes, to turn to those substitutes, to try to meet those early unmet needs. So what is the way forward then? I want to spend a couple minutes talking about this before we wrap up here. And again, my gosh, I could talk at length about everything that I've been sharing today, but I hope this is a helpful conversation nonetheless. So first and foremost, when we talk about the way forward, again, I must say this: healing starts with safety, not shame. If your system feels unsafe because you are berating it, it cannot heal. We cannot heal in the same conditions that made us sick. So some of the ways forward that we can take here: nervous system regulation. Okay, so even things like predictable routines, stable living situation, security with food, consistent gentle movement, consistent time in the natural living world, a consistent sleep schedule, same bedtime each night, same wake up every day, getting sun under the light of the sun, early morning sun, getting your feet in the grass and getting grounding. That's how we begin to regulate the nervous system. Okay, the next way is we've got to connect with compassion over condemnation. Okay, and if we can find and create a community in our lives of healthy relationships, this helps us to safely and healthfully open our dopamine pathways, right? Have you ever connected with a new friend and you're like, wow, what a great connection. Oh my gosh, right? And you're getting full body chills when you connect with this person. Well, there's your dopamine hit. Community over condemnation. Somatic practices. Okay, so you guys know that I integrate somatic work into everything that I do: breath work, body work, humming or toning with the voice, just dancing in your kitchen, walk barefoot on the grass, sing in the shower. Okay, this doesn't have to be fancy work. Obviously, yes, you can work with a practitioner such as myself or anyone else who does this work truly, but it doesn't have to be any more complicated than these things that you can do right in your own home. Okay, bring in the 4 Universal Healing Salves that I teach in my work. That's my framework for my Rewilding Wellness program. The singing, the dancing, the storytelling, the silence, okay? Quite literally or figuratively, each one of these healing bombs help to discharge stress, help us to get unstuck, helps us to release the stored and sequestered emotions that have been energetically hanging out and blocking our fascia, our connective tissue. And so it allows us to repattern the brain and the body connection, right? So there's that, the small daily rituals, as I mentioned before: morning sunlight, eating mindfully, connecting with gratitude, meaningful conversation. All of these things gradually help to rebuild a sense of agency and trust with yourself and with your body. And of course, professional support does matter. Okay, so, and, be discerning about the practitioners you choose. There's a lot of people out there claiming to do quote unquote healing work. And so we've got to be really discerning about who we let guide us. But if you find professional support, someone who's trauma informed, right, offering all of these integrative therapeutic modalities, support groups, okay? Sometimes we need supplements, sometimes we need herbs, sometimes we need medication, okay? So I've learned even in my own healing that this is about less white knuckling and more tending to the stress and the wounds beneath the cravings. Eating the balanced meals, resting more, letting yourself sing, moving the body instead of reaching for a sweet treat, asking for support, recognizing that the substitute that you're reaching for is just that. It's a substitute and it's not actually meeting a need. And remember that it's actually wiring you to continue to reach for that. It's building up that tolerance. The more quick, cheap hits of dopamine, the more that your system needs. And please practice compassion. I still have to practice compassion for myself daily. Okay, this journey, remember, I always say healing is not a straight line journey, it's cyclical. And that is true for all forms of addiction. Okay, every gentle act of self-care is a message to your nervous system that says you are safe enough and you are loved enough to heal. So before we close, I would like to offer a prayer to everyone who's listening. Just take a moment to, if you can, if you're in a place where you can do this, maybe place a hand on your heart. Feel your feet on the earth. Feel the crown of your head pulling to the sky. And take a moment to feel the natural ebb and flow of your breath moving in and out of your body. And just allow these prayerful words to land. For every heart carrying the weight of craving or the ache of shame, may you remember that this is not a flaw in your character, but the story of your nervous system that is trying to survive. May the part of you that longs for freedom grow louder than the pull of the substitute. May your body find safety. May your heart find companions on the road. Your mind find clarity. And may your spirit remember its worth and its light. May the small daily miracles, the light on your skin, a shared meal, a song hummed under your breath, may these small daily miracles become medicine for you. And may we, as a culture, build spaces that heal instead of harm. And so it is. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I certainly hope that this episode was helpful for you or for a loved one. If it spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need this. If it was helpful for you or a loved one, let me know. Reach out to me. And please remember that you're not alone. Help is always available. Okay, reach out to a trusted friend. Reach out to me. You can call there are a variety of substance use hotlines and helplines. There's 1-800-662-HELP if you need immediate support. There are many other resources available. Please let me know if you need them. Until next time, continue to rewild your wellness one breath, one step, and one choice at a time. Be well and lots of love.